Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here to talk about some tips and tricks for getting into Shakespeare or to getting used to his work or to getting started reading his plays. Basically, beginner's guide to Shakespeare and how to read him, I guess. Before I get into that, I want to once again draw your attention to the description box. I am pre-filming this, but at the time of filming this, Breonna Taylor's murderers have still not been arrested. I will link some information specifically about that down below. So now into the tips and tricks. Even though I kind of described this as a like Shakespeare beginners video or like how to get into Shakespeare, how to read Shakespeare, like even though I kind of described it as a guide, this is really just going to be kind of a loose series of tips and tricks that I think might be helpful. But the bottom line for this video is whatever works for you is a good way to get into Shakespeare. So it might be that some of these tips work, it might be that none of them work. Just keep trying stuff basically and pick what works for you. If you try a certain approach and it doesn't work for you, then try something else. Don't give up. But yeah, just not the same thing is going to work for everybody else. And speaking of which, Julia and Olivia, I believe, are both doing kind of similar guides or intro videos, so I will link those down below if those are already up. This video is also in connection with our All the World's a Page readathon, which will be happening in July, which we were all so excited about. So that's why I decided to do this video now, even though it's been something I've been thinking about doing for a while. So I have these tricks kind of loosely grouped into categories, and the first one I'm going to start with is before you read. So some things to consider while you're kind of preparing to read Shakespeare for the first time or just getting back into his work for the first time, and also kind of how to pick which play you want to start with. I will mainly be talking about his plays, although of course he also wrote sonnets and narrative poems, but I will be kind of focusing on his plays today. So the first trick I have is kind of self-explanatory, which probably several of these will be. These seem kind of obvious, but I think they bear reminding people of, because I think there's a tendency to treat Shakespeare as something that's almost like separate from normal reading. And even though I love Shakespeare and there are a lot of things that are special about his work, it's not like his work is so different that you can't apply your normal reading tastes and habits. So the first trick I want to talk about is just basically reading something that you care about, like that you're interested in. Like if you like stories with fairies in them, read A Midsummer Night's Dream. If you really like tragedies, maybe Hamlet would be a good one. If you like comedy and banter and hate to love, Much Ado is a fantastic play to start with. So this trick can really vary a lot depending on the person, but basically just pay attention to what you enjoy. And pick a play accordingly. I know that can be a little harder if you're not familiar with Shakespeare because you don't necessarily know which plays have which elements, but there are guides out there where you could definitely ask somebody you know who is like really into Shakespeare. They would probably have a recommendation for you. Like if, for example, if you hate tragic love stories, maybe don't read Romeo and Juliet as your first Shakespeare play. And then as kind of a related trick, I do have a couple of plays I think are probably really good ones to start with, although again this can vary between people, but Much Ado About Nothing, in addition to just being one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, I really do feel like it's a great place to start because the characters are fantastic, like the relationships and the dynamics are so interesting. Beatrice and Benedict have one of the greatest like banter, hate to love relationships I have ever read. They're kind of like the prototype for me. There's also some great female friendships in that play, and even though it is a comedy, there is some like upsetting or kind of serious themes that are dealt with, and I think for the most part those are done well. Because it is a comedy, some of them are resolved in ways that I don't personally enjoy, and I feel like if we were telling the story today, things wouldn't turn out the way they did. But overall, I think it's a really well-rounded play. The comedy aspects are great, the relationships are great, characters, the humor is absolutely fantastic. Like Shakespeare is a very clever writer, and I feel like Much Ado is one of the plays that shows that off the best. And like I said, there are definitely still high stakes in this play as well, so it definitely moves pretty quickly. So I think that could be a great one to start out with. And then the other one is Macbeth. I feel like that could also be a good one because there's some really great like villains or gray characters, and it's also very short. I think it's one of his shortest plays. I actually know a lot of people who this is one of their favorite Shakespeare plays. So I just feel like this one would be a great one to start with if you really want something that kind of examines morality, that has like morally gray characters and a lot of plotting as well. Also there's a lot of famous lines from this play, so if that's something you think is interesting, Macbeth would also be a great pick for that. My next tip is to try a lot of different things. So it might be that the first play that you pick up is one that you really enjoy, and that kind of helps you like grow in confidence as you get used to reading Shakespeare, so that would be great. But sometimes, as with any genre or any kind of book that we're getting used to, sometimes the first thing or the first couple of things we try don't actually work out that well. And so this is just kind of like the perseverance aspect. Is I know it can be frustrating, but Shakespeare wrote so many different stories and so many different kinds of stories that just because you don't like one or two or even three or more, that doesn't mean that you can't find something of his that you enjoy. Like that doesn't mean that he's not for you, or I know some people sometimes feel like they're not like smart enough for Shakespeare or educated enough, and that is absolutely not the case. Like everybody is capable of reading Shakespeare. I think there are definitely advantages to having it taught to you in a certain way. I didn't really start loving Shakespeare Shakespeare until college because I had an amazing professor, which kind of continued my love that had sort of sparked earlier. So there are definitely things that can help people, I think, be more interested or more open. But if you're worried that like you just won't be able to follow or you won't be able to understand, I don't think you should feel like that. There is an adjustment period, as with any very different style of writing. But I don't think it's insurmountable. And that's just something like, I know a lot of people are joking when they say it, but it always makes me really sad when people say that they're not smart enough for Shakespeare, because that's absolutely not true. And then my final kind of like before you read tip is to watch some adaptations. And this one I kind of recommend tentatively, because in general, like I read quite a few classics, and in general I recommend not spoiling yourself for the entire story before going in. But I think with Shakespeare, getting used to hearing people speak like that can really, really help if the writing style is kind of what's putting you off with Shakespeare. And the great thing about adaptations, obviously like because theaters are still closed at the time of filming this, this will probably be like through film or something like that. But whether you're watching a movie or watching a live performance or anything, if you have a good performer, you will be able to follow what is happening in the scene. You might not get all of the details, but because of the actors' like tone and intonation and the way that they're reacting to other things, you'll be able to pick up on like how characters feel about each other, kind of the general idea of the scene. You'll probably be able to pick up on some of the jokes as well. So I think watching adaptations or watching even just part of an adaptation, it can definitely get you kind of situated in that older style of speech. But again, I would kind of caution you, don't just like read the entire Wikipedia page probably. Like, I know it's tempting to just want to know the whole story so that you can feel confident you'll understand what's going on. But I really do feel like one of the exciting things about classics is going into one and not actually knowing what's going to happen. Like there's just something very special about reading something that's like 400 years old and being surprised at the ending. My next kind of category are things to do while you're reading or that are related to the actual point when you're actually reading a Shakespeare play. And the first one I have is about choosing an edition that you like. I mean, if you're taking a class, you'll probably have like a textbook kind of copy, and those can be great. I know a lot of people love the Folgers editions. I think Pelican Shakespeare is another one people like. So there's a lot of different editions out there. And it depends on how much like effort you want to put into finding a particular edition, because I understand that's not something everybody would want to do. But if you do really care about getting like the perfect edition for you, like read some reviews, kind of ask around, try to figure out what the differences are with editions. Like maybe some of them have more historical notes than others. Basically, this tip comes down to, I think the edition can sometimes make a difference, especially if you're just getting started out. And I would also kind of mention I think basically all editions come with footnotes where they explain things. And as you're reading, I would maybe suggest not getting too caught up in reading every footnote or every like note in the margin where they translate a Shakespearean phrase or something. I'm definitely not saying don't use those. I think those are super helpful. But if you're kind of getting really into the flow of a scene or of a monologue or a speech, maybe you don't need to go back and check those until you get to the end of the page, you know? If you're somebody who can just read side notes and then jump right back in, then that's great. Go ahead and do that. I personally have always found it kind of difficult to like jump back in without losing the flow of the story if I get too caught up on the footnotes. I have that tendency, so I'm just mentioning that in case other people have a similar thing. So again, this is one of those tips where it's like, do whatever works for you. If you're somebody who likes to have every single footnote at the second that you read it, then do that. If you're somebody like me who feels like it kind of detracts from the flow of the story, maybe come back to them at the end. But yeah, just basically do what works. And I think especially as you read more Shakespeare, you'll find more and more that you don't actually need to rely on those translations as much. Another great resource that I highly recommend for beginners, or actually intermediate or advanced, is No Fear Shakespeare, which is online. I don't know if you can actually get it physically, but it's an online resource. And what they do is they have the original text of Shakespeare on one side of the screen, and then right next to it, they have translated it into modern English. And I think that is such a useful tool. This is something I also would recommend using kind of sparingly. Basically just use it to check yourself. Like if you feel like you're at a pivotal moment in the play and you're not quite sure you're picking up on all of the nuance, then go to No Fear Shakespeare. I have definitely used it for like monologue work and things before because it's really great for making sure you know every single detail of a particular scene. But don't go overboard with it, because I think Shakespeare is one of those things where people understand it a lot better than they think. As you're reading, and especially as you continue to read Shakespeare, I think you will definitely understand what is going on a lot better than maybe you expected or even than you think. Like it might feel like you're missing a lot of stuff, but especially if you go back and check yourself, I think you're probably going to realize that you actually were better at it than you thought. At least that has definitely been my experience when I was starting out with Shakespeare. Another tip that can be useful and also just kind of fun is to read out certain sections out loud. Like if you're having trouble with a speech or you can't figure out the rhythm or what it means or anything, try reading it out loud, because you know Shakespeare was intended to be heard. They were actually written as plays to be performed and viewed rather than read, even though I love reading them as well. So sometimes being able to actually listen to it as you speak it, that can sometimes be what clicks and what makes you finally understand understand the passage that you're reading. And my last tip in this category is to take notes if you have to. Again, this is one of those that sounds very basic, but don't be afraid to do it in a funny way or in a way that is helpful to you but that other people might not understand. There are quite a few like note sources out there for Shakespeare, so you know, you can definitely check out one of the ones that other people have created. But as you're reading, if you need to make like a family tree, or if you need to look up a family tree, I know I had a page open on Wikipedia when I was reading Richard III because I could not keep straight the different characters in that play. So if you need to pull up other people's resources, if you need to use sticky tabs, if you need to like come up with funny nicknames for characters so you remember who is who, just basically do whatever you have to do as you read. Although this is another one where don't get so caught up in note-taking that you kind of lose the flow of the play. And then finally, my last few tricks are just basically come under the heading of fun, or just find ways to make it fun for you, to get excited about reading Shakespeare rather than seeing it as an assignment or an obligation. Like, I don't know if you guys follow SparkNotes on Twitter, but they have some amazing literature memes. Quite a few of them are Shakespeare related, and it seems like a silly thing to recommend, but honestly, I feel like one of the ways to enjoy Shakespeare is to realize that it's a story to get excited about, like anything else that we do here in book blogging land. Like there's fan fiction, there's memes, there are Shakespeare retellings, which again, you check out All the World's a Page because we're very excited about that. Like there are lots of ways that you can kind of apply modern enjoyment to Shakespeare that I think adds like an extra dimension of fun. Like basically, don't treat Shakespeare as like something that's like so special and so sacred that you can never like joke about it or like do something silly with it, because that's not true. And also, I don't think Shakespeare would have even liked that, because writing was hilarious and he probably would have thought it was weird that we were treating it like it was something untouchable and that you could never laugh at it. Another suggestion is consider reading it with a buddy. If you want to do like a structured buddy read, or if you even just like have a friend who enjoys Shakespeare and you kind of want to talk to them about the play as you're reading it, that can also be another fun thing to do. And then my last kind of like for fun suggestion is just related to something I mentioned earlier, which is that Shakespeare was like, his writing is very funny. Even the plays that are not comedies have a lot of humor, a lot of wordplay, and just something to remember about his plays is I think that the way that they're taught in schools a lot of times, the teachers kind of gloss over the funny or the dirty parts, and I just want you guys to know, this will also help you understand the plays better. If it sounds dirty, it probably is. Like, Shakespeare loved his dick jokes, he loved his puns and plays on words, which again were often also very dirty. A lot of the references in his plays were jokes, many of which were inappropriate, and I feel like that's something that's important to know, because for one thing, it helps make the plays make more sense, and it also kind of makes them more fun to read because you're acknowledging that there's humor in them. Okay everybody, so those are some of my tips and tricks for getting into Shakespeare and to being just a little less intimidated when starting to read his work. Like I said at the beginning, the most important takeaway from this video is use what works for you and don't worry about the rest. But hopefully some of these were a good starting point for you guys. Please comment down below and let me know if you're going to try any of these tricks, or if any of these have worked for you, or if you have different suggestions of things that have worked for you. And also let me know if you're going to join us for All the World's a Page, which is happening in July. We are all so excited and we would love to have people join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!